So Clive from Final Fantasy XVI has officially entered the King of Iron Fist tournament with Tekken 8, and today we're going to take a look at a dev diary between the two development teams at Tekken 8 and Final Fantasy XVI to figure out how this whole idea got started in the first place. And then of course, we're going to address the big elephant in the room of why the heck is Tifa Lockhart not in Tekken 8 yet? I've got a few ideas of why that might be and why you shouldn't give up hope that she will eventually be included. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe and to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So this dev interview comes to us from Bandai Namco, where they got the two dev teams of Final Fantasy XVI and Tekken 8 together to discuss how Clive got into this situation and is now the final guest character of Season 1 for Tekken 8. So on the Tekken side of things, we have the game's main director, who is Kohei Ikeda. We also have the chief game designer director, who is Yoshinori Takahashi. On the 16 side of things, we have Hiroshi Takai, who is the game's main director, Ryota Suzuki, who is the game's combat director, also someone who worked on fighting games in the past, which is pretty cool, as well as Kazutoyo Maehiro, who is the creative director for 16. So one of the first things you notice with this dev interview is that both teams are big fans of each other's franchises. The Final Fantasy devs love Tekken, they recount some of their stories of playing the game growing up, and the Tekken devs are massive fans of Final Fantasy as well. So there's a genuine respect there, which even goes all the way back to including someone like Noctis in Tekken 7, which then leads to Clive being in Tekken 8. And this whole idea got started with Ikeda. During the development period for Tekken 8, they were thinking of different characters that they could include as guest characters for their game. So he knew around that time Final Fantasy XVI hadn't released yet. It was still kind of doing some of their marketing and promotion, really kind of getting off of the ground. So he went to the Final Fantasy XVI website, saw an image of Clive, and was so kind of struck and taken aback by the character design that he's like, maybe Clive would actually be a really good fit in Tekken 8. And as he read more about the game's story, he realized that the story of Tekken 8 really kind of mirrored Final Fantasy XVI in a way in regards to their main characters, Jin from Tekken 8 and Clive from Final Fantasy XVI, and that whole theme of breaking free, which is super important for both of those characters, especially in Tekken 8 for Jin, breaking free of his father and that Mishima bloodline, the devil gene being his own person. Same exact thing with Clive, breaking free of a lot of that guilt that holds him down, the weight of his family being royal. So many things go into that. So the two themes really do come together quite nicely. So after that, he brought the idea to Katsuhiro Harada, who is the man behind Tekken, the face of Tekken rather, who then brought the idea to Yoshi P. And they had a few discussions on how to get this done. And Yoshi P's biggest stipulation was that we want you guys to at least play Final Fantasy XVI first before you actually put Clive in your game, because we want you to understand Clive as a character, where he comes from and his motivations. So essentially, they wanted to make sure that this wasn't just, hey, let's throw a cool character in there and call it a day. They really wanted to make sure that the Tekken 8 team understood Clive and how to properly implement him into the game. And again, Square Enix's relationship with Bandai Namco goes all the way back to Tekken 7, where they had Noctis from Final Fantasy 15 in there, and he was my main in Tekken 7. I loved Noctis, so much fun. I see a lot of Noctis-isms in Clive, and the Tekken 8 team said that Noctis was one of the most popular characters in Tekken 7. I think he may have been the most downloaded too, if I'm not mistaken. So in order to get this whole thing going, the Tekken 8 devs went to the Square Enix offices and spent an entire day playing Final Fantasy XVI main missions from beginning to end to get a sense of who Clive was, what his moveset was, and how they could properly incorporate it into Tekken 8, and vice versa. They brought the Square Enix devs builds of Tekken 8, and they were just set up in one big room just playing the games and figuring out how they could make them work together. And they're just big fans, so getting to play early builds of these things was pretty cool. Now, when they asked Ryota Suzuki about including Clive in Tekken 8, his first response was he loved Clive a lot. He spent 4 to 5 years developing this character for 16, and to develop an action-based character like that who would fit really well into a fighting game. And the biggest thing for him was that he liked Clive so much that he didn't want to see him go away. He didn't want the story to end for Clive, and spoiler alert, for those of you who have finished 16, it's kind of an open-ended ending for 16. You either think Clive died or maybe he survived. They're pretty vague about it on purpose. But that was one of the biggest reasons he wanted Clive in the game, is like, yeah, I want to see Clive do more stuff. And I agree. That's one of the biggest kind of, not necessarily issues I had with 16, is that Clive is one of the best things about that video game. 16's got a lot of issues, it's got a lot of cool stuff, but one of the reasons I kept playing was because of Clive. And when that game ends, I'm like, man, I'm kind of bummed out because I want more Clive. I want to see him do more things. I want to see him have more to his story. So while this isn't going to be like a big canon thing for Clive, he at least gets to live on and be a part of a really cool game, which is awesome. And again, kind of circling back with Suzuki being a former fighting game developer working on a lot of 2D fighting games, this was kind of a full circle moment for him to have a character that he designed for 4 to 5 years that was an action-based character that honestly at times really plays like a fighting game character. And they really do point that out, like, Clive is basically a fighting game character. And if you played 16, you understand. The dude's got insane blocks and counters and parries and like chain attacks that are all super cool. So that had to have been a really awesome moment for him to kind of, come back into the world of fighting games for a little bit with a character that he helped create. And when they did say that Clive was probably the best suited to be in a fighting game, obviously, those are going to be some fighting words for some people. Tifa is another character that is just so well suited for Tekken. But again, I'll get to that in a little bit. So one of the things the Tekken devs wanted to do was to make sure they paid the proper respects to Clive, not just in how they implemented him into the game and how he played, but also how he looked. They wanted to keep him as good looking and faithful to the 16 adaptation as they possibly could, especially since every character in Tekken can be made into the main menu character, meaning you pick a character and they are the person you're going to see on the main menu screen. For me, in Tekken 8, I have my waifu Reina. I just boot up the game, she's staring lovingly into my eyes. It's a magical moment. For a lot of people, they're gonna have Clive, and you need him to look good, and he looks good. Now, one of the things the Tekken 8 devs mentioned is that they did have to adjust elements of Clive's body so that way he fit properly into the world of Tekken and didn't really look out of place. So they made some adjustments to his waist size, which is the biggest change in the body of Clive, but they also made his legs and his thighs much bigger, and I think his arms too. They didn't want him to look kind of lanky or awkward standing next to characters like Jin or Kazuya, and boy is he thick. But he looks good. He still looks like Clive. If you've stared at Clive long enough, you'll notice like, okay, yeah, I do see some differences, but it's nothing super massive or jarring until you get to his sword, which I believe was called Invictus or Invicticus. I might be adding some extra syllables into that, but they did say that they had to make the sword a little bit shorter compared to how it is in 16 because it would have messed with a lot of the gameplay stuff. If you kept the sword super long, no one would be able to reach Clive. He'd be a long-range killer. Good luck trying to get past that. So it was really for balance purposes. So they put a lot of love and care into putting Clive in this game. They even, in the character select screen, they have him with his little flame thing, which is called the Will-O-Wisp, which is an attack that Clive actually gets in the game. And funny enough, the 16 devs said the reason why Clive has that little fireball is because they couldn't figure out how to get torches to work in 16, which makes sense. Like, does Clive just carry a torch on him? Does he put it in his back and then it goes away and then it comes out lit? So that's honestly like a really cool in-world explanation for why Clive has that little fireball. Now, that's the end of that dev interview. There are 2 more parts, but I think those are going to focus a little bit more on things like Ifrit and maybe some of the combat stuff. But I wanted to focus specifically on the character stuff and how Clive got into Tekken, because I feel like it supports the idea that Tifa will eventually get into Tekken 8. It's just going to be a while. So one of the first things you may notice is that these guest character spots don't happen overnight. It's not like 6 months ago they decided to add Clive into Tekken and boom, here he is. This is stuff that is worked on years in advance. It takes a lot of time. 16 wasn't even out yet when they made the deal to have Clive enter this world. And for a game like Final Fantasy 16, which is a one and done game, it's a standalone. The game comes out, you play it, you learn about Clive, that's it. You don't see Clive ever again. So it would make sense for Clive to be in that world because technically his story is done. The game's marketing is technically done, which leads me to Tifa. A lot of people, including myself, really wanted Tifa in Tekken. I've been screaming for years, like, if there's one Final Fantasy character or video game character in general that should be in a fighting game, specifically Tekken, it's Tifa. She's that badass warrior monk who's got an incredible moveset that's only been expanded with games like 7 Remake and Rebirth. She's a natural fit as a fighting game character. It needs to happen, but it doesn't make sense to put Tifa into Tekken 8 right now when the 7 remake trilogy is in the middle of its story. Again, much like Clive being in 16, they could release 16, you could finish that story, and that's basically it. Now Clive is in Tekken, but Tifa, in the world of FF7, that story isn't done yet. We still have Remake Part 3 coming out potentially in 2027. And if Remake Part 3 is going to be the big blockbuster that I think it is, and if Square Enix decides to put a ton of marketing budget into Remake Part 3, then yeah, it would make sense for Tifa to be a guest character to help promote the end of your remake trilogy. Because when it came to Rebirth, the marketing was pretty sparse here in America, and based on some of the other stuff I've researched, also in Europe. So what better way to celebrate the end of your big trilogy with a game that's probably going to be the best of the bunch than by doing a ton of marketing promotion. Have a hamburger at Burger King, put Cloud in Fortnite, have Tifa enter Tekken. Because now your trilogy, your big third part, is going to come to an end. And it's really great promotion for that third part, as well as the rest of the series. And it would just make sense for Tifa to be put in there in maybe like the 3rd season of DLC characters in Tekken 8, because it's great promo for both of those games. So it's entirely possible that discussions to get Tifa into Tekken 8 are happening right now. We just won't see anything for a few years. And seeing how much love and care went into incorporating a character like Clive, I know they would do the same thing with Tifa. And I would rather wait and have Tifa be put into Tekken 8 at the right moment with the right amount of love and care and dev time possible to ensure that she comes out right, instead of them just sticking her into Tekken 8 halfway through the remake trilogy's run. So maybe that sounds like hopium or copium, but that's kind of what my brain is kind of figuring out as to why Tifa's not in Tekken 8 yet. And rest assured, the people at Bandai Namco, Michael Murray, Harada, they know how popular Tifa is. If I'm not mistaken, Tifa is the most requested guest character for Tekken 8, and she's been that for a very long time. That's also not lost on Square Enix. So I'm sure eventually she will make her way into Tekken 8. It's really just about timing. And when Part 3 comes out, you're gonna go on a marketing bonanza really promoting that game. It makes sense for her to enter the King of Iron Fist tournament, potentially with Season 3. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Again, I know there's a lot of people really upset right now that it's Clive and not Tifa, but I'm hoping that maybe my making sense of it theory makes sense for other people too. And other than Tifa, are there other video game characters that you would love to see show up in Tekken? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.